Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. This morning, I am joined by Andy Scales. Andy, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, James.
It's good to have you on. So Andy is founder and director of CampaignLab, widely regarded at the moment as one of the most innovative PR agencies in Australia. 7 years in, CampaignLab has racked up more than 40 industry awards and has twice topped Provokes rankings as APAC's pound for pound most creative PR agency. At CampaignLab, Andy has won and worked on accounts for Fiji Airways, Oppo, Love Honey, Fuji Film, Intercontinental, Hertz, and many, many more. You're absolutely smashing it, mate. Prior to setting up CampaignLab, Andy worked with PPR and Porter Novelli in Australia and the UK, where he's worked on brands like HP, Siemens, British Airways, Dell, and many, many more. So when I thought about PR and what's the state of the industry as we head into 2023, I thought it'd be great to get you on and have a chat. So yeah, I think just what is PR these days versus what it was 10 years ago? We do a little bit of work with clients that have PR agencies. I think the space has changed. There's lots of overlap with digital these days, digital marketing, social influencer. I hear that PR and SEO are now the same thing. So is it still getting good articles in the media? Is it not that anymore? What is PR, Andy?
Well, firstly, I think what an introduction. So hopefully I can live up to the hype. But
and you didn't even feed it to me like any good PR guy would. had to write it myself.
You hit those key messages for me, so I appreciate it. That's a great question. Right? What is PR today? I can certainly tell you what it's not, and it's not just purely about media relations. It's not about just getting column inches in the newspaper, and that's probably a significant change that has occurred over the past 10 years. It's really about it's about brand management. It's about brand reputation. So whether you're trying to build up a brand or launch a product through earned media, taking an earned first approach. And then of course you touched on some of the areas. So social media obviously has been a massive game changer over the past 10 years or so. And that's a big part of certainly what we do on a daily basis as well. And it's not just about specific channels. So it's not just social media and working on across social channels. We'll work with people that are influencers in their own right to drive earned media coverage in more traditional media titles. So there's a lot of crossover. It's a really exciting space to be in.
Yeah, it's cool. In terms of that, like what work are you typically doing at CampaignLab? Like what are the actual channels, disciplines you're kind of working within? And I'd be curious also, like you've got quite a diverse range of clients. I think it'd be interesting, and I'm sure that all of them have different setups in terms of where they buy their traditional media, and if they've got a social agency or whatever, what certain things being done in-house. Like how do you kind of align with your clients and get that scope right?
Yeah, so in terms of the way that we work, I mean, typically we work to either one of two models. One is a retainer or project, or a lot of the time it's both. So we might have an always-on program for brands that have got things happening, new products launching, milestones they're reaching, and things that we want to communicate through PR and other channels. And then of course they may have big projects or initiatives or a major product launch where we'll develop bespoke campaigns, and it's kind of in our name to really create a spike in awareness and engagement around that particular activity. So at the core of what we do at CampaignLab, it's PR, it's earned media first, but we also have a number of other elements and I guess pillars within the business. So whether that's digital advertising, which you know well, James, to social and influencer engagement, right the way through to content production as well is another big part of what we do and how that all kind of comes together.
Yeah. So I guess like the theme, if you touched on it a few times, the core of PR being earned media.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for us, we use the media simply as a barometer to test a campaign's success and whether or not it's going to be successful. So, is this idea, is this story good enough to get past a news editor at one of the major metro titles? And if so, then that's a tick in the box. And then we look at how else can we bring it to life, because that's just one channel. So, how then can you get people sharing the content on social channels? How do you get people down the pub talking about this campaign or initiative that's taking place? Or, you know, how can we use traditional advertising models, whether it's digital, out of home, to further amplify and create this 360 integrated approach, I guess.
Yeah. And is that change essentially has come about because of the way the world's changed in the last 15 years, where 15 years ago, eyeballs were on traditional newspapers and traditional TV, and eyeballs are now everywhere. And you guys basically then, how do I get the eyeballs on the story? Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's you probably touched on two really interesting points there. So firstly, you know, and I'm kind of showing my age here, but when I started out, if you got a piece of coverage online, then you'd have clients say, yeah, but that doesn't really count, does it? Because it's online, it's not in the paper.
It's not real.
It's and it's completely flipped, right? So now it's you know, if you get a piece in the newspaper, then it's a nice kind of vanity piece, and some CEOs still like that. But in terms of longevity, you know, an online piece is going to live much longer. You can amplify it across different channels. You get CEOs sharing stuff on LinkedIn, etc., and also, you know, feeds into things like SEO and all those important things that we as marketers have to think about. So that's certainly changed a lot over the past 10 years.
It's really interesting. Like, what percentage of your work or any typical PR agency would these days be spent in, you know, media mentions with an obsession over getting in the Fin Review or getting in the SMH or the Age versus kind of a broader look?
Look, I think it varies depending on the clients that you're working with. So, you know, some it's about brand management, brand reputation, and you know, particularly if you're working with brands that have, you know, beat reporters and journalists that are really interested in that space, and you know are going to jump on you know any of the stories that are coming out. You know, then it's about kind of that ongoing presence and momentum and managing that reputation. So we see that with a lot of the, you know, the big global brands that we work with, or, you know, airlines, for example, that, you know, we know there's going to be a lot of interest in what's happening there. And then on the flip side, you've got more challenger brands and people that are trying to break into the market. And for them, it's about how do we really create a spike in awareness right now for us as a brand? How do we break through and cut through the noise?
Yeah.
And, you know, look at more lifestyle publications or influencers. So, yeah, it can vary a bit.
How do you it's kind of interesting because I think we've talked about it offline. There's lots of overlap in terms of our two businesses, even though we both, I think, identify we're very, very different in terms of core skill set and offering. But there's certainly, if it's a Venn diagram, there's some overlap there. I mean, we pitch ourselves as a performance digital agency, so, you know, it's generally managing paid media to get a certain outcome, or it's SEO, which is outcome based but doesn't have the paid component. And I think a lot of your stuff is coming at from a brand perspective. Very different in terms of how you would measure the success of kind of those two different parts of marketing. Like, how, like, what sort of metrics are you working with clients on to kind of deem that things are successful or haven't been successful? Because it's probably very different to how a digital marketing agency would look at cost per lead and all those much more kind of attributable things.
It's a brilliant question. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges that's always faced the PR industry is, you know, how do you measure it? And you're right. So, you know, you guys working in digital performance, so, you know, you can clearly look at it and go, well, here's the cost per click or the cost per lead coming through, and track it right the way back. With PR and earned media coverage, it's a little bit more difficult. So, you know, one thing we don't do is we don't look at advertising equivalence, which has been, you know, plagued the industry for many years. We look at other measurements like search traffic to the site as well. So, you know, are we seeing an increase in search traffic around particular product launches or events or things that the PR team have done? Brand lift studies as well. So certainly with some of the bigger brands that we look at, you know, so at the start of the year, we might look at a brand study for a client that maybe shows that they want to be seen as more premium or something like that, you know. So how do we how do we influence that over the course of the year through the different campaigns that we're running.
Yeah.
There are probably a couple of ways that we do it. And then also, it can come down to sales as well. So, PR and editorial coverage can drive sales, and we look at those things as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think probably at the same time that you're trying to sell in the virtues of online mentions for CEOs, we'll call it 5 years ago, and that was probably 15 years ago. I think we were probably like the pitch that I was taking out there was spend your money in digital, because every dollar you spend, I can demonstrate the return on it. And I was kind of saying, take your money out of Yellow Pages and pump it in here, and 50 grand of advertising, I'll get you 1,000 leads, and as long as 1,000 leads outweigh the 50 grand, we'll keep doing it each month. When that's like digital's now flipped, where we work with so many clients where it's just not that simple. You're selling in a B2B space, or even in a B2C space with some degree of complexity on the buyer journey, and it is kind of veering more towards, I know half my marketing budget's wasted, I just don't know which half, and it's not that it's wasted, but our clients that generate the greatest success are the ones with strong brands, where they are engaging in kind of brand building activities. So I think it's really interesting that we kind of both probably win and lose from different sides of the same argument. Kind of
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You mentioned advertising equivalence kind of being a bit of a no-no. Like, what is that? Is that the how much you would have paid if you'd had to buy this kind of reach? Is that kind of right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so advertising equivalent is a, you score it. I can't remember exactly how it works, but it's like 2 times this of ad value of the equivalent cost of taking an ad in that particular media title. So look, it's one of those things where it's a very rudimental measurement, but we look at it and kind of say, well, taking an ad out in a paper is one thing, but if you've got the endorsement of a journalist that's meant to be credible, third party to everything, and educating and informing its readership, then we'd say that that's more valuable than an ad placement there. But so I think that's probably a measurement that we certainly don't support, and we'd look at other things to measure success.
Feels quite logical, and probably it's funny, there are so many overlaps where we will say the same thing about organic traffic, right? Where generally you kind of get in the tick of approval of Google if you are appearing in a prominent organic position, and the studies do show that organic traffic is a little bit more trusting than paid.
Personally, I think you can't beat the 2 blokes talking down a pub kind of metric. So are people actually having conversations about this brand and the things that it's doing in everyday environments?
Yeah. How because in the brand uplift stuff's really interesting. I think we both have a mix of clients, right, with some larger businesses and then some smaller mid-market ones, less kind of household name. With the big businesses, I think it is easier to kind of go, you've got this brand study, it's happening twice a year or 4 times a year, and you can kind of see that it's improving or not based on other activity. Any kind of hacks on how you can measure brand uplift for kind of smaller businesses where they might not have that, either the budgets to put into it, or the brand name hasn't been out there for as long? I think that's something we struggle with when you're trying to build a brand.
There's some cost-effective solutions out there with kind of omnibus surveys, in particular. The likes of Pure Profile do quite cost-effective options where you can go out with 10 questions to 1,000 respondents to kind of do those studies. So that it doesn't have to be a 50 grand market research piece, but this will give you an indicator of where you're sitting in the market. Otherwise, even just getting out and speaking to your customers, your prospects, your audience directly as well, and hearing from them about what they're saying about the branding market is another thing as well.
So more kind of on the almost a bit of ad hoc qualitative kind of research.
I mean, we as an agency as well, like our whole ethos is around joining the conversation. So that's probably a slightly different take to the way some people might look at PR and communication. So rather than just talking about what this brand wants to communicate to its audience, we go, okay, well, what are the audience actually talking about? What things are they interested in? And how do we be a part of that conversation? So that can be, as simple as, social listening studies and things like that. So what's our target audience currently talking about on social? What content are they sharing? What kind of people are they following? As well as, often we'll go out and do vox pops on the street. to get kind of real genuine insights from target audiences and go, okay, well, that's the area and the conversation that we need to be playing in.
It's really good. Have you guys played much in TikTok?
We have, and it's an interesting one. It's actually for a recent campaign, it performed really, really well for us. So
on the organic side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we do both. So we do we do some paid influencer work on TikTok as well as organic stuff. So what was interesting, so this was it was a recent campaign we ran for a brand called Nebula. So they were launching a projector into the Australian market. So, again, going back to join the conversation. So
I think this might have been one where I read the PR. I read something in a mainstream publication and sent it to you and said, this reads like a PR release you've written. And you're like, yeah, basically.
Yeah, that was, yeah. So it's interesting because, their whole thing was this projector is all about cinematic experience. So we're like,
can you get me a free one? It looked like a great product.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Well, you could have gone to see it for free at our cinema, but so basically they were saying our cinematic experience. So we're like, okay, what does that mean? How can we show that to consumers in a fun and creative way? So then when we looked at what are the conversations that those consumers are having, they're not talking about the megapixels of this projector. They're not talking about the laser functionality. They're actually talking about what they streamed on Netflix over the weekend and those kind of things. So we're like, okay, let's play on that and create Australia's first streaming cinema that you could book 2-hour booking and you could stream anything you want. So what was interesting about that was the experience itself was unique enough that it drove earned media coverage. So people were like, Australia's first streaming cinemas rocked up. Is this the future of cinema? So we got the earned media coverage, and then it became an experience that people wanted to do. We had on the wait list over 2,800 people by the end of it. It was crazy.
Same.
But a lot of that was driven by TikTok. So these weren't paid influencer programs whereby cash was exchanged in hand for them to promote this cinema. The experience was unique enough that these influencers wanted to come. So we took them through, they captured content, shared it organically. And, I remember one Saturday morning waking up and I was convinced we'd been hacked because we were getting alerts for every time somebody had registered on the wait list. It was literally just going ding, 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 ding. So that's the power of TikTok because, we had a lot of earned media coverage at the time that drove traffic, but it was that organic content on TikTok that really, really took off. So it's an area where we're focusing a lot of time.
Really interesting. I did want to talk influencers. Like we could obviously do a whole pod, just on the topic, but what are the do's? What are the don'ts? What are the trends? How has the space changed in recent years? Because there has been so much movement.
Yeah, that's right, and it's certainly an area that's taken off, and it's changing a lot, and particularly in the recent years where changes to advertising laws and things like that, where influencers have now got to disclose those partnerships. You've seen the likes of Instagram then get rid of the like functions and things. So it's an area that's starting to mature, starting to take shape. For a lot of brands, it was a bit of an unknown, and even today when you speak to influencers, and if it's in a paid partnership agreement, the cost side of things or the investment from a brand can vary dramatically from people to people. So that's it's a space that is still evolving. We use software platforms like Clear, which is really, really strong. So that looks at things like influencers, not just their reach, but their true reach, the geographies where their audience are based, because that's important. Somebody might have 1 million followers, but if they're all overseas, then it's irrelevant. And it also looks at things like other brands and partnerships that they've worked with in the past. So we use a lot of technology to do a lot of the legwork for us, and that enables us to identify potential partners, influencer partners for the brands we work with. So that's helpful.
Yeah, nice. That's good. Yeah, interesting. You've got so much experience both in Australia and the UK. So I think just observations about the Australian market and is it actually different to what's happening in the UK? And I don't know how much exposure you have to the States. Are we ahead? Are we behind? Are there certain things that kind of work here that don't work there? What's your kind of observations there?
be careful not to offend some people here, aren't I? But yeah, it's interesting. I think, well, from a PR perspective, there's certainly some similarities, I think, in earned media coverage. Australian media landscape is much smaller than say UK media landscape. That's probably the biggest fundamental difference is the volume of media in a market like the UK. But often you'll see coverage syndicated as well across titles. So if you're in the tech space, like a CNET, for example, or a Tech Radar, those kind of publications, you'll see coverage from the UK appear in Australia and vice versa. And that's just the nature of the World Wide Web. But so there's certainly some similarities. I think there's certainly people from the UK probably think that in terms of the maturity of the market, they're much further ahead, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I think Australia is a market for PR in particular that's very advanced and very mature. And that's why a lot of brands, that they use Australia as well as a bit of a test bed for products, and you see that a lot. They want to see what the response is from consumers. They want to see what the response is from media, and take some of those learnings into other markets as well.
Yeah, interesting. So for me, kind of where I'd like to move the conversation now, Andy, is like, where do you see the industry going? Like 2023, 2024, what will just stay the same, keep doing its thing, and where is change and what direction is it going?
Yeah, well, I think, news is news, so that's not ever really going to change. I think that what we're kind of seeing, though, is that the media landscape is shrinking. The number of journalists are fewer and far between. So brands are having to get super creative and really compete for that share of voice. One of the areas where we're seeing a lot of kind of growth is around brands realizing that they need to have a clear brand purpose. And the brands that are kind of staying true to that purpose are the ones that we're seeing great success. So there's some amazing examples. One of my old bosses over in Europe works at ASICS, so the fitness brand. They're a brand that I think are doing some incredible stuff. So what their whole brand purpose is, they've realized that they exist to as a fitness brand to join the dots between fitness and mental health. So you exercise and it's going to help in terms of your mental health. So that's their kind of purpose, and they're just kind of focusing really heavily on that. So then they've done some really interesting things. So for example, they just ran an ad campaign where they were kind of taking the mickey a little bit out of the traditional before and after photos. So they had one person kind of before and after image, but they look pretty much the same. And the underlying message there was that the benefits of exercise are not always, visible to everyone. So that was an ad campaign, but of course that drove media coverage, and it drove social engagement. So it was the idea there that was really, really clever. So I think that brands like that have a true purpose and a clear vision as to why they exist, they're the ones that are going to succeed. And
that's hard, isn't it? Because I presume that's not something you're doing, right? Like something that kind of a client comes to you and says, this is what we stand for as a brand, and whether they actually live it and live and die by it is a different matter. And, we hear about the Patagonias of the world who have done such a brilliant job on that. Like, but how do you do it? Like if you're a listener on the pod and you're working in a mid-market business that kind of hasn't have those building blocks in play, it's a challenge, isn't it? To kind of, where do you go?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's practical elements to it, frameworks and things that you can work through to identify that. There's brands that we work with where they've come to us and they've already got that mapped out. So Love Honey, for example, adult toys, their whole purpose is around driving sexual happiness. So very, very clear. And then everything that we do from a comms perspective kind of falls out of that. Other brands aren't quite sure what their purpose is. They've got great products or something, and we'll work with them to finesse that and identify the area where they can play. And so there's practical ways and frameworks that you can work through that, for sure. And
having that architecture is so important, isn't it? Because I think it gives the in-house team clear direction. This is what we stand for. This is where we're going to play and where we're not. And when you're engaging with someone like you, it's like, it helps you go, okay, I get it. This is where we're playing. It would probably similar to us, where it's really hard to run effective digital marketing campaigns if you don't have a lot of the building blocks that, brand assets, landing pages, websites. It's kind of the building blocks to actually have the canvas to help us do our thing, right?
Yeah, and never underestimate the power of internal communications as well, because if you've got a workforce of 200 people, or fewer or more, it doesn't matter, but if your workforce is crystal clear on what your purpose is and what your mission is, then that's going to resonate, and they communicate as well, and the conversations that they're having with customers, partners, suppliers, it resonates and grows from there.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Just the last area I wanted to dig into, advice for listeners to the pod, in-house marketers, like how do you integrate PR into your marketing efforts? Because I think there will be different cases. I presume there'll be listeners to the pod that everything's done in-house. We'll have listeners to the pod that they've got an agency like Rocket running their digital media, and they might have a web agency, and they might have a creative agency. How do you bring a PR partner in, and how do you do it in a way which sets, I guess, yourself and the business up for success?
Well, firstly, if you're working in an agency village environment, I think it's important to get PR involved early on. Where we see it fall down is where the marketing team might be working with the creative agency or media buyers to develop a campaign, and then it's PR is often brought in a bit late to the game. So how can we PR this? And often by that point it's too late. So I think that PR needs to have a seat at the table early on, so that we can kind of look at it and go, okay, well, how can we create earned media value out of this? How can we expand on what we've got already? And often, that kind of two-way dialogue among agency partners within that village can go a long way and result in better, more integrated campaigns. Everyone knows the role they're playing. So I think that's probably one thing. If it's more about just engaging a PR agency, maybe you're not working with other agencies, but you want to bring in a PR agency, it's all about the brief. And I think be as detailed as you possibly can be. A shit brief gets you shit results, and it's as simple as that. So the more information you can provide around the audiences that you want to reach, what you're really trying to achieve, will be really beneficial. And don't kind of pigeonhole the PR team either into just purely focusing on output. We want some press releases, and we want product reviews, and we want this. I think it's let them go away, give them the challenge, and let them come back to you with ideas about how they can drive and coverage to meet your overall objectives.
Yeah, it's good advice. Do you guys have a briefing document if a client comes to you and doesn't kind of just comes to you with stuff that you think isn't going to be detailed enough for you to do your job?
We do, yeah. Do you want me to send you it? You're looking for it?
It's I read up that podcasting is big in PR in 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, in all seriousness, yes, we do. We have brief documents. So when we get a cold inquiry or something like that come through the website, then often we'll send that as a first port of call. I think budgets as well. Like, everyone's so nervous to put budgets on a page, and it really does have a massive impact on what comes back. And it's not about agencies just being greedy and wanting more money and this kind of thing. It's really not. I think it's about just understanding the limitations of what we can come back with. So as everyone goes, we're looking for big ideas, but is it big ideas for $5,000 or 500 grand? And what we come back with is going to be very different.
That's it. Yeah, I had Jordan Slover, who has an agency like ours in the States, and we're kind of just talking about how you go about working with an agency and procuring an agency that if we couldn't pick our own. And the budget thing is just so true. Like, I think the client side is so worried about revealing a budget that the agency is going to clamor to take it all. And I think we just want to know, is it $5,000? Is it 500 grand? And this is what a good solution would be, because the reality is like it's still a market, right? And you can still go off and get your quotes from elsewhere, and you probably are. So it's about the value you're getting.
Yeah, and if you're developing like a full kind of integrated campaign or something, often a number of those costs are third-party costs anyway. So it's not like the agency's really trying to, you know, it might be an event organizer, or it might be some Facebook ads, or, you know, those kind of things where it's really about just having an understanding so that we can go, okay, this is how we think you could best spend this budget to deliver the results that you want.
That's
And
it.
things can be scaled up and scaled down, but yeah, if you're responding to a brief out of budget, you know, it's a recipe for disaster, I think.
Couldn't agree more. So final question, we asked this of all guests on the pod, Andy. What's the one piece of marketing advice that you'd give to an in-house marketer listening to the pod?
Great question. Probably a few, but I think probably the most important thing for me would be about knowing who you're trying to reach. So clearly knowing your target audience, and then that way, you know, teams like mine at CampaignLab can go away and look at what are the conversations they're having, and how as a brand can you be a part of those conversations. Because without knowing who you're targeting and being really, really clear on that, then you know, you're opening yourself up to too many variables.
Love it. Great answer. Andy, how can listeners find you or CampaignLab?
Yep, so they can visit our website, so www.campaignlab.com.au, or they can email us at hello@campaignlab.com.au.
Legend. Thanks so much for your time. Excellent insights for listeners to the pod. Thanks, mate.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Jimmy.